Hello, everyone. Welcome to WOW Live, Word on Wednesday Live. Um, we're here to on the 23rd of September. My goodness, the month has gone by so fast, and we are into the fall season, and quite a lengthy time we've been doing this. 22 lessons. That's 22 weeks. Okay, it's kind of crazy, but nonetheless, there we are. And I wanted to share something with you here before we get started. Just kind of a little bit, just a couple of thoughts I was having. Have this item here. It's an old photo album. I don't know if you can see the word album on there or not, or at least part of it. Very old photo album. It's got pictures that go back to easily back into the 1800s. You look in here and you see people that look like they're dressed for the time of the Civil War, and it's actually quite fascinating. And the interesting thing about this is it's somewhere in here it's written down that these are relatives. Charles and Nettie Bartle's relatives. That would be my maternal grandfather's parents. Okay, and they would have these relatives' pictures that they collected. Here's somebody almost looks like he's got a kepi hat there that he's holding in his hand, and which would have been a Civil War-like thing, or at least that time. But I can't tell if that's what it is. The rest of him looks pretty neat, so I think it might have just been part of his suit. And this woman here, just very contemplative, very typical of some of the poses of that time. No one really smiling. The thing about it is, this guy looks great. Kind of like, he hung out with Charles Darwin or something. I don't know. The thing about it is, I don't know who any of these people are. They're not named. There's no names written in the book. The only person that I have a name for is this individual right here, and his name is George M. Hoover, or possibly George W. Hoover. It looks like it could be a W there. I'm not sure, but George Hoover. And there are some Hoovers in the family tree. Have found them, so they're back there. Away. Here's some kids. Let's see. It's just really faded, but a couple of children there, and then there's this picture here. Of course, it means nothing to you folks, but it looks a great deal like my one aunt Lois, who's passed away. But just kind of interesting what we've got here. The thing that it tells me is the people had these photos. They knew them. They could look and say, "Oh, there's Jane. There's Sally. There's Molly. There's Fred, and so forth." These names could be meant something. The faces meant something to people, and the photographs at the time probably were a really big deal, as photography was kind of hitting a stride, but still hitting into the popular culture more so than just certain people and that kind of thing. But you just have to wonder, or it makes you think, how quickly time goes by, and how quick a life can be. 50, 60, 70, 80 years or so, and pretty soon. There's people who look at your picture in a photo album or maybe online or something now, and remember for a while, and then in time doesn't really seem to matter as much. And I'm dying of curiosity to connect names to some of these people in here.
And I suppose it could happen if anybody else has a picture that's obviously the same person with a name, that would be good. But it just reminds me of the brevity of our lives, how quickly things pass, and what really matters in life, what really is significant. What we do for the Lord is that which lasts forever. And just kind of a word of devotional maybe to get us started tonight. I didn't put anything together formally there. That was just sort of a last-minute kind of thing, but just wanted to share that with you. Well, anyway, we are in lesson number 22 in our study of the fascinating book of Revelation, and tonight we're going to finish Revelation chapter 17. So, last time that we were together, we focused on Revelation 17, verses 3 through 5, and looked at the differing layers of evil spiritual history implicit in this passage. And I think that's so important, a kind of a look at the satanic program that's been in place for centuries, millennia, really. Revelation 17, 3 through 5 says, I, John, meaning John, the apostle, saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. And on her forehead a name was written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. And this is the central picture for this chapter, this woman riding this beast. The woman in this passage represents the evil supernatural forces that lead humanity away from God. She is the evil temptress that entices the whole world. This great harlot of Babylon represents a one-world belief system, or a one-world religion. Notice that she rides on the back of the beast, who represents the uniting of the nations under one global government. This means that she's riding upon the nations themselves, driving them, demonstrating the link between godless belief systems and the governments of the world system in which we live. All right? So there's a link between them. See, every nation has a dominant ideology or some dominant belief system that undergirds its philosophy, that sets its mission that it's setting out to do, what it wants to, what the nation sees itself as its purpose and what it wants to accomplish, what its destiny might be. It dictates the way that it governs, how it operates. Nations do not exist apart from the belief systems around which they are organized and upon which they are built. Every system of governance, every human organization really, is predicated upon some kind of a philosophy or a worldview which gives it its values. It informs those values. And what a nation or an organization values, what it thinks is important, that's going to determine what it does. And also what it leaves alone, considers to be unimportant, leaves undone. So in this imagery, in Revelation 17, we have this one world religious system of the tribulation period directly riding upon the back of the one world political system that is coming to pass in our time. What kind of things does that system believe, and how does it determine what a nation does? Obviously, some nations in the world really devalue human life, and have in the past done that. And it's reflected in what happens in those nations and so forth. And Mystery Babylon has been interwoven into the fabric of the progression of Earth history. There's manifesting itself in a wide variety of forms along the way. Very intricate, very complex, having very different trappings depending on where it shows up and when in human history, but there's always that same thread weaving its way through history, carrying this same basic ideology. And we see at the end of time here, it really becomes a unified one world religion. Everyone realizes that we've all kind of believed the same things outside of Jesus Christ. And it's riding on the back here of the revived Roman Empire, the vast one world government. And it's driving it. It's driving it. Of interest, the European Union has as its symbol Europa, a woman from Greek mythology, and she is riding the Greek god Zeus, who had taken the form of a bull for the purpose of abducting her because he found her to be beautiful. Zeus was like that, kind of a playboy at heart, I suppose. Anyway, here you see Europa bearing the flag of the European Union, and she's carrying that, and she's riding on the bull. And this must be some kind of a political cartoon. There's other small nations gathered on the back of the bull as well. But Europa and the bull also appear on the coin, the euro, that you see there. And so that's a common thing for them to have this woman riding on a beast. In terms of today, folks, if you could imagine the New Age belief system, a pagan kind of belief system, in conjunction with the New World Order that's coming in place, that's rapidly forming politically as we speak, you'll begin to get a fair idea of what the great harlot astride the scarlet beast is really all about. Okay? And it starts to put that together. And this imagery of this woman riding the beast, it also resonates in modern culture in the United States. Here is an image of pop star Katy Perry, and she's riding a beast during the 2015 Super Bowl halftime show. She's riding a tiger instead of a bull. Interestingly, the tiger is a lot closer to the leopard-like beast of Revelation 17, Revelation 13. You sort of have to ask yourself something when you see this picture. Why Katy Perry, who started her career as an American or as a Christian gospel singer, would suddenly appear as Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of abominations of the earth? Why did she choose to cast herself that way? Or was the choice made for her now? Does she have handlers who make those decisions for her? All of it, in either case, very, very intriguing. We said last week that Nimrod was the very first one to bring together a one-world system of governance as he created an empire in the Mesopotamian region of the world, where the Tigris and the Euphrates are. We know from Jewish writings that he was described as a hunter of the souls of men. He's described in the Bible as a mighty hunter before God, and that's clarified in some of the rabbinic writings that he was a hunter of the souls of men. He was seeking out men. A hunter of the souls of men is a fair word for a politician trying to get votes, trying to seek the souls of men and women who would vote for them or support them. This man, Nimrod, wanted to rule over others and have everyone do what he wanted. Nimrod met a woman and took her as his wife, and we learned last week her name was Semiramis. Now, the name Semiramis is a Hellenized form of the Sumerian name Samur Amat. When Samur is translated into Hebrew, it becomes Shinar, as found in Genesis chapter 10 and verse 10, where it says, the beginning of Nimrod's kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. Thus we can say this first empire of the world, this first one-world government began in Babel, in the land of Shinar, or we could say, in the land of Semiramis. Babel is known as Semiramis land. The symbolism of the woman riding the beast in Revelation 17 may well be based on Semiramis, the originator perhaps of that sort of image of a woman. As high priestess in Nimrod's empire, she had instituted the practice of astrology. I don't know if she devised it or if she put it all together and sold it to the masses, so to speak. We're not sure. We learned last week from writer Bryce Self that Semiramis astrology was a perversion of a godly understanding of the constellations according to the astronomy practiced before the great flood of Noah's day. So the pre-flood world was understanding the stars and the patterns in them from a godly perspective. God says the heavens declare his handiwork, and the firmament the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows forth his handiwork. Day unto day uttereth speech, night unto night bringeth forth knowledge. There's a way of knowing things in the stars, and perhaps they had a message in the stars that's been somewhat lost to time because it's been perverted by pagan beliefs and ungodless beliefs that take it in the direction of a predictive kind of form for how somebody should live their life and what matters to them and what's going on in their lives. Self-centered kind of focus, you see. Let's pick up where we left off in Nimrod and Semiramis' story. We're going to take these accounts somewhat with a grain of salt because can't really confirm some of these things. Nonetheless, here's the thing for me. Whether this is an absolutely true story or not, there are elements to this story that become themes in numerous cults and belief systems throughout the world. And there's a pattern that everyone sort of believes that it's that thread that I was talking about that weaves through the different systems. So let's talk about the story and see where we go from there. It seems that Semiramis had an affair and conceived a child illegitimately, a son. To protect herself from scandal, she plotted to overthrow Nimrod. The New Year's festival in the empire celebrated Nimrod's ascension to power. So whenever the New Year would come around, they'd have this big festival or feast that celebrated the New Year and celebrated him coming into power. And what they would do, there was a ram that was 1 year old that was sacrificed, and sacrificed brutally, being torn apart alive. And as part of the New Year's feast, the flesh would be eaten raw. Now, I'm not an Emily Post person necessarily, okay? I don't follow rules of etiquette. However, there's something about this that just says, no, that this just shouldn't be done. You know, that's where I come down. You know, they would eat this lamb sacrificed there, eat the meat raw, and then a new lamb was presented at the feast, which would become the sacrifice for next year's celebration. You know, at the beginning, the lamb's like, wow, this is cool. Everybody thinks I'm great. They're celebrating. They're glad to see me. They're cheering. They're laughing. They're having a great time. New Year coming. But you only got 1 year, buddy, and then it's your turn to be ripped to pieces. But anyway, the old year dies, in other words, and the new one takes over. This is what we see symbolized. We even do this today with Father Time. You know, he's coming down to the end of the year, and he looks like he's barely going to make it to December 31st, and then there's this brand new spanking baby that picks up on January the 1st. But only 1 year, that's all you get, Junior, okay? So, as High Priestess, Semiramis directed these rituals of this feast. But in this particular year, however, where she was planning to get rid of Nimrod, she had it set up that Nimrod himself would be the sacrifice. And then her son would be installed as the new king. She had named her son Damu, or Damuzi, D-A-M-M-U-Z-I, which becomes Adonis in the Greek language and Tammuz in Hebrew. So we're going to call him Tammuz for the most part. Instead of Tammuz suffering the sacrificial fate that his dad, well, not really his dad, Nimrod had gone through, well, Semiramis established a system whereby the next year that would come around, the next new year, there would be a young man who would take Tammuz's place and be the sacrifice. And he'd be promised that as he was sacrificed, because he willingly gave himself to Tammuz, he would ascend into godhood. And so that was a big deal. So that's how they kind of sold this. Have an athletic contest, and whoever wins the athletic contest gets to be the sacrifice, I'm not good at sports, so I'm not playing. Anyway, Semiramis had herself deified as the so-called Queen of Heaven, all right, thus bestowing divinity on herself and also, by proxy, on her son Tammuz. They both become a goddess and a god. Over time, as things changed, Tammuz became associated directly with Nimrod, meaning that the story goes out that he actually is Nimrod, just a rebirth of Nimrod, a reincarnation of Nimrod. And the belief rose that Tammuz would therefore die each year, as they did with the ram, right? Only to return in a new season, and he would take his place as a god once again. And so this follows the planting, harvesting, and dying seasonal changes that would take place. And there would be mourning when he dies, but then there'd be rejoicing when he comes back to life, and fertility, fulfilling the whole thing with the growing season and the planting season and all that. But what happens with this legendary story, actually, that begins there in Babel? Well, as Babel is broken up, and the people are spread all over the earth by God, well, they take this story with them. And over a short period of time, it gets embellished, it gets changed, all kinds of different mythic elements that more fitting to the cultures and the history that's happening. They're added to this account of these original gods on earth. And they each sort of take on their own flavor, but in the center you have this core of basic ideas that's very much the same. For example, take this story here of the Egyptian god and ruler Osiris, all right, and his wife Isis. Osiris is murdered by his brother Set, and Set dismembers the body of Osiris, takes it apart, and he sends the parts of the body all throughout the kingdom. Isis steps in, and with the help of another goddess by the name of Nephthys, collects Osiris' remains, and then he's brought back to life. And you can see it here. He's dressed in white there, sitting on that throne or whatever, that seat. He's resurrected. He's new, shiny, right? And there's Osiris there sitting, and then Isis is behind him, and she's got the white gown on, and they're attending to him or whatever. And on the other side of her is another woman there, Nephthys, and she's helping out or whatever. So the resurrected Osiris, then, he fathers a son by Isis, and she names him Horus. And so you have Isis on the left and Osiris in the center and Horus over there on the right. After this, Osiris has done all he's going to do for history. He pretty much fades in significance in the Egyptian mythology, and the focus comes on to worshiping Isis and her son Horus. Okay, a common motif portraying those two together shows Isis nursing Horus. And so you have this rise of this mother-child cult. And you can see the strong parallels in this, into this original story of Nimrod, Semiramis, and Tammuz. Nimrod, he disappears, right? In fact, he's dismembered in that horrid New Year's ritualistic frenzy, right? Semiramis then proclaims herself a goddess and her son Tammuz a god. The worship of mother and child begins in Babel, and it shows up throughout the different cultures of the time. In Babylon, she had the name of Ishtar. And it's believed there that Ishtar was married to Tammuz. She married her son, who was also her husband, and it sort of has that I'm the father, I'm the son, and resurrection, and those kinds of things, or reincarnation or whatever. If so, this might mean that Tammuz actually had married his mother Semiramis in Babel there. I don't know. In Sumer, Tammuz was known as Dumuzi, D-U-M-U-Z-I, and was the consort of the Sumerian goddess Inanna. And Inanna was known as the Queen of Heaven. Inanna happens to be yet another representation of Semiramis, this goddess. In Greece, Tammuz became known as Adonis, as we said earlier. Adonis means Lord. We think of Adonai sometimes when we talk about the Lord, and Adonis means Lord. So he has this connection, you see, to the Canaanite Baal. Baal, or Baal, also means Lord. Eros was another incarnation of Tammuz. Okay, and Aphrodite was Eros' mother. And she links back to Semiramis as well. So there's this constant connection. And so you have Eros and Aphrodite, and in Rome they were known as Venus and Cupid. It's worth noting that the title Queen of Heaven occurs in two places in the Bible, both with negative connotations, and both times in Jeremiah. Being the Queen of Heaven is not a good thing, according to the Bible. God told Jeremiah that whole households, entire households in Judah, were caught up in the worshiping of these pagan gods and goddesses. This was the problem in Jeremiah's time, this idolatry and these worship of pagan gods and so forth, and goddesses and everything, including the Queen of Heaven, would bring the judgment of God. And God talks to Jeremiah here in chapter 7, verses 17 and 18. He says, "Do you not see what they do in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem? The children gather wood, the fathers kindle the fire, and the women knead dough to make cakes for the Queen of Heaven. And they pour out drink offerings to other gods, that they may provoke me to anger." Okay, so you've got the whole family involved. It's a whole family project. Kids go out and get some wood. Dad builds the fire. Mom makes the cakes for the Queen of Heaven. And this is the kind. It sounds like a fun family time, but it's also got these symbols in it that fall back onto pagan religion and worship, and they provoke him to anger as they make these offerings and so forth. Later, the Lord God, speaking through Jeremiah, his prophet, he's talking to the Judean people through Jeremiah, and he tells them that he must come against them in judgment if they do not cease their abominable ways in worshiping pagan gods and goddesses. But the people refuse to heed the word of the Lord. Jeremiah chapter 44, verses 15 through 18. "Then all the men who knew that their wives had burned incense," okay, these guys are hip to what their wives are doing, but they don't try to stop it or anything, happy wife, happy life, okay, this is the way these guys are living, and they burned incense to other gods, with all the women who stood by, okay, the women are there too, it's a great multitude, and all the people who dwelt in the land of Egypt in Pathros. They answered Jeremiah on this charge of that God's going to bring judgment if they don't stop, saying this: "As for the word you have spoken to us in the name of the Lord, we will not listen to you." Well, there's some rebellion for you. "But we will certainly do whatever has gone out of our own mouth." See, we're the masters of our own destiny. We're going to be our own gods. We're going to decide what we want to do. To burn incense to the Queen of Heaven and pour out drink offerings to her as we have done, we and our fathers, our kings and our princes, in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem. Hey, buddy, this is a tradition that goes way back. You can't be coming in here messing around with this, because back then, you see, we had plenty of food. We were well off and saw no trouble. But, oh man, since we stopped burning incense to the Queen of Heaven and pouring out drink offerings to her, we have lacked everything and have been consumed by the sword and famine. Oh, really? Oh, that's so sad that you're suffering. Okay, this Queen of Heaven in the Bible, okay, is likely Ashtoreth. Now, Ashtoreth was a Phoenician goddess worshipped on the Mediterranean coast, just west and north of Israel. Okay, Phoenicia, that's where Jezebel was from. Her father Ethbaal was the high priest and the king of Tyre, which was the capital of the Phoenician people. Okay, and Ethbaal married his daughter Jezebel to Ahab, the king of Israel, and she becomes the high priest of Baal throughout Judah and Israel, and well, it just messes things up for them and gives Elijah a lot of trouble. But the goddess Ashtoreth out in Phoenicia, she had a son named Tammuz. Once again, we note the worship of a mother and her child. The theme is everywhere. This theme runs throughout the ancient world. Here is a chart showing some of the ancient connections to the mother-son cults. In Egypt we saw Isis and Osiris, mother and son. In Assyria, Ishtar and Bacchus. In India, Isi and Iswara. In Asia, Cybele and Deos. In Greece, we saw Aphrodite and Eros. And in Rome, Venus and Cupid. In Babylon, Rhea and Zoroaster. And in Phoenicia, as we've seen, Ashtoreth and Tammuz. Of course, in Babel, the origin of all this, Semiramis, the queen of heaven, had her divine son, Tammuz. And it all had to start somewhere, and that's what we see here. The Zondervan Pictorial Encyclopedia of the Bible, it has an article on Ashtoreth, and in that article, it talks in there about the worship of mother goddesses. The worship of mother goddesses in the Near East and elsewhere in the Old World is evidenced by the frequency of small fertility figurines excavated from sites as early as the Lower Paleolithic. It's an early time of stone, Stone Age kind of thing. Paleolithic means it's early stone work, and that's what it wasn't like Bronze Age or whatever. The earliest written documents from Mesopotamia and Sumer mention the goddess as Inanna, whose shrine and cult center at Uruk in the Akkadian language, or Erech in Hebrew, Genesis 10:10, or Warka in Arabic, Iraq today. Okay, all this stretches back before the Proto-Literate period of southern Iraq to the 4th millennium BC. Proto-Literate means an early form of written language, and it even goes back before that, is what they're saying. According to various extant Sumerian legends, Inanna was the consort of the shepherd god Dumuzi. In the Hebrew, that would be Tammuz. And then they cite Ezekiel 8:14, for whom she wept at his seasonal death. Now, last week, we read in the book of Ezekiel 8, Ezekiel lived shortly after the time of Jeremiah. Jeremiah was prophesying the destruction of Jerusalem and Judah. Ezekiel was living during that time when Babylon was attacked by Nebuchadnezzar, and when Jerusalem was attacked by Nebuchadnezzar and the people of Judah carried away captive or imprisoned or whatever. So anyway, in Ezekiel 8, we were reading last week about Ezekiel's visions of all the abominable worship practices happening in the temple in Jerusalem. Everything they thought they were doing in secret. God's left Israel, he doesn't see us, that kind of thing. Recall that Ezekiel 8:14, as part of all the abominations listed in the temple, had this to say, so he, the Lord, brought me to the door of the north gate of the Lord's house, and to my dismay, women were sitting there weeping for Tammuz. It was the time of the season of the year when Tammuz had died, supposedly, and so they're weeping for that and looking forward to a time of rejoicing later. The Roman Catholic Church has called Mary, Jesus' earthly mother, called her the Queen of Heaven. Of course, the image of mother and child is commonly associated with the Catholics' adoration of the Virgin Mary. Now, if this pattern, this theme, or whatever you might want to call it, this thread through history of deifying mother and child, if that is an abominable concept, according to what we've seen so far, born out of human rebellion and satanic influence back to Babel itself, perhaps, and maybe even before the Great Flood, if it's been around that long, and it keeps repeating, would it at all be surprising that such a theme might manifest itself in a corruption of the Christian church? I don't see where that's an impossibility to happen. Someone lets their guard down, something gets in, somebody starts teaching false doctrine, and voila, there you are. Now, I have no doubt that you are now thoroughly confused by all these different names of gods and goddesses. So what I did was I gave you a list there. Just memorize that. It will be on the test, okay? Well, there won't be a test, but anyhow, there's a lot there. Here's the thing. For the most part, just remember that these are all variations of the original set, whom we're calling Semiramis and Tammuz. Her son and then her husband, or was he the husband and then the son? I don't know. I get confused. I'll find out next New Year's. Anyway, he came to be viewed as the resurrection of Nimrod, who was Semiramis' first husband. Recall her as the woman found in Revelation chapter 17. That's where she fits in. This seems to represent this whole thing of the goddess. On her forehead a name was written, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. Let's pick up the text in Revelation 17 there, now going to verse 6. John says, I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I marveled with great amazement. We see here the truth and the lie sharply contrasted in this verse. The false belief system that the woman on the beast represents is depicted here as being giddily out of control, like drunk, because of the death and the execution of true saints of Christ. She's celebrating it. Bible teacher John Walvoord says, the woman is pictured not only as the source of all evil, now notice what he says here, of source of all evil in apostate Christendom, okay, in the Christian realm, the Christian world, okay, apostate Christendom. She's the source for all of it in Christian circles, okay, of apostate Christianity, but also as actively engaged to the point of drunkenness in the persecution of the true saints. It's not just that we've changed Christianity here. We're going to celebrate the destruction and the pain being experienced by those who still believe the old way, that Jesus is the only way, that kind of thing. Here, the primary reference, he says, is not to ancient Babylon, but to Babylon perpetuated in apostate Christendom, especially in its future form, meaning future from the time of John and the apostles, okay? The history of the church, looking back at it now from our perspective, has demonstrated that apostate Christendom is unsparing in its persecution of those who attempt to maintain a true faith in Jesus Christ. How true that is. You see the persecution of the Christians by the true believers by Rome itself, with the Inquisition and everything that happened as a result of that, burning heretics at the stake and everything. The Reformation, there were reformers who were treated that way by the Catholic Church, and then some of the reformers themselves carried out those same kind of things against more radical reformers, like the Anabaptists, and putting them to death, drowning them in the river, and all kinds of things that were carried out against them. They were living just like the church they were trying to change. Didn't really make a whole lot of sense. But that's the kind of thing he's talking about here. He goes on to say, what has been true in the past will be brought to its climax in this future time, when the martyrs will be beyond number from every nation and language. The blood shed by the apostate church is exceeded only by that of the martyrs who refused to worship the beast in the Great Tribulation. For his part, the Apostle John is left marveling, wondering over this vision of this woman sitting upon this beast. You can imagine him thinking, what does this mean? Saw the beast earlier, back in chapter 13 for us, but now this woman's there. Who is this woman? And the angel interrupts his thoughts. But the angel said to me, verse 7, why did you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. The beast that you saw was and is not, and will ascend out of the bottomless pit and go to perdition. And those who dwell on the earth will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they see the beast that was and is not and yet is. The beast here is the same beast that arose out of the sea in the beginning of Revelation chapter 13. It is also described as the fourth beast in Daniel chapter 7. The fourth beast as in as many world empires. There were four beasts, there were four world empires described there. And here is what it's described like in Daniel chapter 7, verses 23 through 25. Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be a fourth kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all other kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, trample it, and break it in pieces. The 10 horns are 10 kings, who shall arise from this kingdom, and another shall rise after them. He shall be different from the first ones, and shall subdue 3 kings. He shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and shall intend to change times and laws. Then the saints shall be given into his hand for a time, and times, and half a time. 3.5 years, the saints here being the saints as Daniel would have understood them, the people of Israel, his own people, and they would be given over to the Antichrist for the final 3.5 years, the time of Jacob's trouble. This beast is seen here as a continuation of this Roman Empire. This beast was, it is not, and it will ascend. It's a revived Roman Empire. Rome never fell to an outside conqueror. It fell due to internal weakness. And as such, its influence lingered long after its glory had passed. Its way of doing things kept going. It was, and then it no longer is, and yet it still is. That's going to be the thing in the tribulation. It'll rise again like the fabled phoenix out of the ashes. The Roman Empire will be revived. And the angel tells John that this beast ascended out of the pit of the earth, out of the realm of spiritual darkness, and it's going to end up in perdition, in hell. The angel now talks about the woman in verse 9. Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. Now, Rome has famously been known as the city on 7 hills. And for that reason, numerous commentators on, interpreters, Bible students of this passage of Scripture have said that the woman, therefore, is Rome, sitting on the 7 hills, linking the city, Rome, directly to the ancient city of Babylon with the name, Mystery Babylon, okay, the Great. After all, the woman sits on 7 mountains. There are 7 hills associated with the city of Rome. Traditional 7 hills of Rome are Aventino, Celio, Campidoglio, Esquilino, Padalina, and Quirinale and Viminale. And as a side note, recall Nimrod of Babel, he founded 7 other cities. There was Babel, and then there were 7 other cities: Akkad, Kala, Kalna, Erech, Nineveh, Rehoboth, and Resen. Remember, too, that we've said several times how often the number 7 appears in Revelation, and here it is again in Revelation 17. At any rate, then, some then see these 7 mountains as being literally geographic regions, real hills in Rome, Italy. Others take a view, however, that the 7 mountains are actually 7 kingdoms, or 7 successive empires, imperial governments, 7 empires of man, more precisely 7 empires of the Gentiles. In his commentary on Revelation, John Walvoord quotes from a man by the name of Joseph Cease, who had a book he wrote called The Apocalypse, his commentary. And here's what Cease says. The 7 hills of the city of Rome, to begin with, are not mountains, as everyone who has been there can testify. The taking of them as literal hills or mountains at all is founded upon a total misreading of the angel's words. So he says that just can't be so. These are mountains, not hills, and Rome's got hills. A mountain, he says, or prominent elevation on the surface of the earth is one of the common scriptural images or representatives of a kingdom, regal dominion, empire, or established authority. So in the Bible, when you have a mountain, when it's used symbolically, this is what it symbolizes, a kingdom. And he says, for example, the kingdom of the Messiah is likened to a stone which became a great mountain and filled the whole earth, from Daniel chapter 2 and verse 35. And this is exactly the same sense in which the angel uses the word here, as he himself tells us. And the angel does tell us this in verse 10. There are also 7 kings that go with these 7 mountains, okay? 5 have fallen. 1 is, and the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must continue a short time. So, what then do we make of 5 fallen kings here? Which king still is? Which is the one that's not yet come? Well, Cease is going to help us out here. Of these 7 regal mountains, John was told that 5 of them were fallen, dead, passed away, their day over. The one was standing at that moment when John was on earth, at the time of the apostles. There's one that is, one kingdom, one empire. It was then in sway and power. And the other is not yet come. And when he shall come, he must continue a little time. So then he says, what regal mountain then was in power at the time that John wrote? Well, there can be no question on that point. It was the Roman Empire. Thus, then, we ascertain and identify the 6th on the list, which shows what sort of kings the angel meant, empires. Of the same class with this, then, and belonging to the same category, there are 5 others, 5 which had already run their course and passed away. But what 5 imperial mountains like Rome had been and gone up to that time? Well, is history so obscure as not to tell us with unmistakable certainty? Preceding Rome, the world had but 5 great names or nationalities answering to imperial Rome, and those scarce a schoolboy ought to miss. They are Greece, Persia, Babylon, Assyria, and Egypt, no more and no less. And these all were imperial powers like Rome. Here, then, are 6 of these regal mountains. The 7th has not yet come. When it comes, it is to endure but a short time. So, the 7 mountains of the 7 kings of Revelation 17 are here in chronological order. Egypt, number 1, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, the Medes and the Persians here in the image, Greece, and then Rome. And then that's the one that's in existence in the Apostle John's day, okay? And then the 7th is the one world revived Roman Empire, which may well be the Roman Church there, the one who is yet to come. That's the one yet to come based upon John's time, okay? So with that in mind, Rome... Yeah, the Pope really did run a lot of nations. The kings had to answer to him. It was an empire for a long time because they considered themselves, the Roman Church considered itself to be the kingdom of God on earth, the kingdom of Christ on earth. And he was the vicar of Christ, the Pope. He represented Christ, so he headed it up. He was the emperor, if you will. Now, look at verse 11 here. The beast that was and is not is himself also the 8th, and he is of the 7, and he is going to perdition. In the Bible, the number 8 marks a new beginning, a following the number 7. 7 means whole. It means complete. There are 7 days which complete a week. The next day is a new beginning of a new week. In the Jewish calendar and reckoning, there are 7 weeks allotted to the spring harvest time. 49 days, 7 times 7. The 50th day, the beginning of the 8th week, is the day of Pentecost. A new season begins, and so it's a new thing. With Nimrod, we saw the 7 cities that he founded in that ancient time, and he ruled from that 8th city, Babel. and his wife Semiramis joined with him, and they initiated this new kind of rebellion against God, an organized city-state religious structure, a new kind, a difficult kind, a different kind, rather, of new beginning. So the Antichrist is the eighth of 7 mountains. He's from those 7, and he, being the eighth, attempts a new beginning, a new satanic world order, a religious and political order under supernatural evil, the woman and the 10 kings. This is Satan's plan. Through this Antichrist, this one who is meant to take the place of Christ, Satan will attempt to garner the worship he craves, and he knows he has but a short time to pull it off. All right? This is his great lie. Think about this. Recall that he once had said in Isaiah chapter 14, how you have fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning, how you are cut down to the ground, you who weakened the nations. For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit on the mount of the congregation on the farthest sides of the north. And I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. I'll be like God. Satan longs to ascend to godhood, to be like the Most High God. And when he interacted with the first human beings, most especially with the woman, he taught the same lie to them. Then the serpent said to the woman, You will not surely die, for God knows that in the day you eat of this fruit, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil, ascending to godhood. Apotheosis is the technical term. The lie, capital T, capital L, is that we too can become like God. We too can know things and decide things for ourselves. We don't need to listen to your word. We listen to the words coming out of our own mouths, learning the secrets of the universe ourselves, deciding for ourselves whether we think an action or a program of our own making is either good or evil. We decide that. It's a religious appeal, it is. This belief system of self-worship, of holding ourselves to be worthy of praise, not holding ourselves accountable to anyone. And I find it interesting that Satan made this appeal to the woman. It's in this light that Paul fascinatingly says this in 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 12 to 14, where he says, And I do not permit a woman to teach or to have authority over a man, but to be in silence. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. And Adam was not deceived, but the woman, being deceived, fell into transgression. Now, folks, this is not viewing the woman as being weaker, but really as being the stronger one when it comes to having words and approaches that influence others. That's what it's really saying. It may be easier to infect the church with false teaching using the woman or a woman as the carrier because of the persuasive power of her words. It is no small thing that it is a woman who is riding the beast. Semiramis quite obviously had powers of persuasion. In Jesus' letter to the church in Thyatira, in Revelation chapter 2, we saw the Jezebel woman there overpowering the church with false doctrine. She was running the show. Jesus was comparing her to Jezebel, the high priestess of Baal and Ashtoreth, who had married King Ahab of Israel. She implemented Baal worship in Israel in a major way, creating many headaches for the prophet Elijah. And we have seen other women in our more modern times wielding great influences in the churches, not necessarily for the good at times. See, this Jezebel spirit, it persists. Granted, such influence can be and should be used for good. And it can be. A Holy Spirit-filled woman who's surrendered to Christ, knows the Word, and is seeking to do things for His glory can be a very positive influence and power in the church. I'm certainly not so naive as to say that such a woman cannot speak truth or even be allowed to teach it in the church, okay? But what we're talking about here in this context of false doctrine and teaching, and that's where we're operating here with this. And it may well be that in such a realm as that, a woman most especially may be the more powerful persuader to lead others astray. Be aware, the Lord will hold us accountable if we tolerate a Jezebel spirit in the church. It doesn't pay to plug your ears and close your eyes and pretend it's not happening. That's kind of a Chicken Little kind of approach or something. In any case, the lie of Satan, capital T, capital L, is thus perpetrated upon humanity in appealing to worship of beings other than the Almighty God. All right? Creatures become God, not the Creator. Paul shows us this journey of rebellion in believing the lie of Satan in Romans chapter 1, verses 18 to 25. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. They hold down the truth and prevent it from being proclaimed. It's kind of like plugging your ears and closing your eyes. Because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. They can know God. They can know who He is. For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made. I see that these things are created. There's a Creator. Even His eternal power and Godhead are manifest, so that they are without excuse. There's no reason they should know there is a God, because although they knew God, see, they did not glorify Him as God. We're not going to listen to your word, nor were they thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man, and birds, and four-footed animals, and creeping things. Therefore, God also gave them up to uncleanness in the lust of their hearts, to dishonor their bodies among themselves, who exchanged the truth of God for the lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. The lie, capital T-H-E-L-I-E. I emphasize it here in the text. This lie of worshiping and serving the creature has found expression in so many forms and in so many venues over the long ages of human history. It began, really, in the Garden of Eden, and was nearly victorious later in the pre-flood world, when the sons of God, rebellious angelic beings who fell, and they came to earth, they took unto themselves wives from among human women, the daughters of men, and they began to have children by them. Now God preserved His plan that He was carrying out through a single family, Noah. The only thing we can conclude is that the rest of the world at that time was corrupted beyond redemption and had to be destroyed in the judgment of the flood. But that didn't stop the lie. It reared its monstrous head once again in the rebellion at Babel, an account we've already covered in some detail. From there, the lie spread throughout the world. And we find that this is exactly what God's chosen people of Israel kept running up against throughout their history of interacting with the neighboring nations surrounding them. Solomon is my poster child for this. He did not follow Jehovah fully like David his father. 1 Kings 11:6 tells us. And he built all these places to worship gods and goddesses on the high places and so forth, and in the oak trees and different areas around it, the groves where they worshipped and so forth. Their influence, the people and their gods, was very great, and we saw it indeed when we studied Ezekiel 8 and all the abominations of the temple, the weeping for Tammuz and so forth. Satan did not give up on his lie just because Israel came back after 70 years of captivity in Babylon. We hear him spouting it again when he encounters Jesus Christ Himself, God the Creator in the flesh. Matthew 4:8 and 9. Again, the devil took him up on an exceedingly high mountain. See, that's where empires are made. Okay? And he showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, all these things I will give you if you will fall down and worship me. Worshipping and serving the creature rather than the Creator has never been more graphically expressed than it was in this scene of wilderness temptation. For there, the creature sought worship from the Creator himself. That's astounding in its brazenness and foolishness, frankly. If Israel, as God's people, was so corrupted by the influence of the lie through the nations around them, well, as we said earlier, it ought to be expected that the church, as God's people, would also be open and subject to the same. It should be no surprise at all that we see within the history of the church that saw itself as the kingdom of Christ on earth, the incorporation and the development of these same pagan themes connected to the lie. We are in charge. We will decide. We get to say and we are speaking for God. See, that's a problem. The worship of Mary alone ought to give us pause to think. That she's often depicted as a virgin mother with the child Jesus, that is so similar to the mother-child cult found in ancient pagan cultures, and it's tough because we say, well, that's the baby Jesus and it's his mother Mary. But there's some kind of change going on. It's nearly impossible for me to see this as a merely coincidental. It's a pattern that's found its way into the church. And you combine this with the history of the Roman Church and its overwhelmingly pervasive influence in the realm of politics in many nations for many years, and you are at least looking at a real model of the woman who is riding upon the beast, upon the kings of the earth. I don't know that it'll be the Roman Catholic Church alone that makes up the belief system which will be so intimately connected with the political system of the beast of the tribulation, but it is certainly not hard to imagine the Roman Church being a great influence, perhaps even the very vehicle of Satan's seat of power in the world at that time. It's no surprise that this 10-horned beast is seen as a 10-nation confederacy that is often called the revived Roman Empire. It's European in its origin. With all this in mind, consider then the closing words of Revelation chapter 17. The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings, who have received no kingdom as yet, but they receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. These are of one mind, and they will give their power and authority to the beast. The beast is calling the shots ultimately. These will make war with the Lamb. They're going to attack Christ when he comes, and the Lamb will overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those who are with him are called, chosen, and faithful. Then he said to me, the waters which you saw, where the harlot sits, are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. And the 10 horns which you saw on the beast, these will hate the harlot, make her desolate and naked, eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. For God has put it into their hearts to fulfill his purpose, to be of one mind, and to give their kingdom to the beast, not to the woman, until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman whom you saw is that great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. That's the last verse of chapter 17. The beast the woman is riding will turn on her, will devour her, consume her. And the 10 kings will then pledge their loyalty to the Antichrist. I want to close with the comments of John Wolford, because what I think he says here, I believe, is very significant. At the close of the chapter, the woman is again identified with the great city which reigned over the kings of the earth, referring to the ecclesiastical or the church power and control of the political which characterized portions of church history in the past and will have its climax in this future period. The great city is obviously a reference to Babylon in its religious rather than its historical significance. This is all about religious beliefs, philosophy, and so forth. The influence of Babylon on Roman Christianity was partly responsible for the assumption by Rome of political power, namely the authority of the church over the state. Do you see why our founding fathers said the church and state have to be separated? It can go both ways. The state can run the church, or the church can run the state. Just as ancient Babylon conquered kings in a political way, so its religious counterpart would dominate political states during the period of Roman papal power. The interpretation that this is a reference to pagan political Rome, as advanced by the historical school of interpretation, or that it refers to a future literal city of Babylon, is wrong. Okay, it's not saying that it's talking about a future actual city. That's what the historical school would say. The city here, according to verse 5, is a mystery, it says. It's not a literal city. The entire context of chapter 17 supports this interpretation, distinguishing as it does between the city identified with the woman and the political power referred to as the beast with the 10 horns. You have a religious power, you have a political power, and they're represented by two creatures, the woman and the beast with the 10-horned beast. After the disposal of Babylon, he says, in its religious form, by its destruction at the hands of the beast, the prophetic revelation in chapter 18 then deals with Babylon as a political force, also destined for destruction at a later date. And so that's what we'll pick up next time. For now, however, please note, this spirit, this Jezebel spirit, especially is what I'm thinking tonight, because it fits with this woman as a religious power. This spirit is active in our world, drawing people away from the truth of the gospel. I'm not going to read this to you this evening, but I would challenge you to do this. Soon after this, read Proverbs chapter 7. Read Proverbs chapter 7. And think of it in terms of the craftiness of a Jezebel spirit, a harlotry, that spirit that would seduce us away with promises of liberation from a system of do's and don'ts, as biblical Christianity is often mischaracterized. But the promise will not deliver. All right? The end of it is in death. And I'm going to spoil Proverbs 7 by giving you the ending. I want to read to you how it closes out. Now, therefore, listen to me, my children. Pay attention to the words of my mouth. Do not let your heart turn aside to her ways. Do not stray into her paths. For she has cast down many wounded, and all who were slain by her were strong men. Her house is the way to hell, descending to the chambers of death. Please join in next week when we study some more. Thank you for listening.